I'm going to start off tonight that this month earlier, on January 14th of 2019, that the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences reported that Antarctica is losing more than 6 times as much ice as it was in the 1980s until now. Most melting was in West Antarctica. It was assumed that the 1 to nearly 3 miles of thick ice on East Antarctica would stay frozen. But now one of the surprises is how much of East Antarctica is melting. Just since 2009, scientists have found that East Antarctica has contributed to about 20% of that big continent's melting. The estimated metric tons that have melted there is now over 2.5 trillion. And there is growing evidence that West Antarctica is not going to stay frozen over the next 50 to 100 years. Scientists' worst fears are what happens if the Antarctic ice shelves that act like dams to hold back Antarctica's gigantic deep ice sheets. What if the ice shelves meet that there is nothing left to hold back all of the continental ice? It will flow into the ocean and sea levels will rise higher and higher. Now, Antarctica has also come up in my discussion about UFOs and alien presence with military whistleblowers and scientists over the past 3 years. One of the first was a retired U.S. Navy petty officer and first-class flight engineer who asked me to call him Brian. He and his C-130 squadron had highly strange experiences flying cargo and rescue in Antarctica in the 1983 to the 1997 time period. On January 2nd, 2015, Brian emailed me along with a copy of the C-130 and his squadron crew. Brian is left of camera in the front wearing sunglasses. He also sent me a map that he marked with X's. Brian's map said, and with that, he said, during my time in the squadron, I flew to almost every part of the Antarctic continent, including the South Pole, more than 300 times. McMurdo Station, which is 3.5 hours of flying time from the South Pole Station, was the point of squadron operation during our yearly deployments. Between McMurdo and the South Pole is a mountain range called the Trans-Antarctics. We flew most of the time at approximately 25,000 to 35,000 feet altitude. On several flights to and from South Pole, our crew viewed silver aerial vehicles that darted around the tops of the mountains almost exactly in the same spot every time that we would fly by, close quote. Then, on January 30th, 2015, I interviewed Brian for Earth Files and Coast to Coast Radio. That interview is still embedded in my original January 30th, 2015 report. You can listen to it by going to my Earth Files archive that is organized chronologically from 1998 to the present day. So go to January 30th, 2015, and there is the title. U.S. Navy flight engineers saw silver discs and entrance to alleged ET and human collaboration base in Antarctica. Brian told me in our interview, quote, one day we were only about 10,000 feet above those trans-Antarctic mountaintops, and all we could see on the initial sighting was the shiny reflection in the silvery things that were darting around down there. I turned to my aircraft commander and I asked, what are those things down there? Brian heard the commander say through the intercom, well, they are not ours. That's all I can tell you, close quote. I asked Brian about the shape and the movement. He said, quote, well, the movement was very, I don't want to say jerky, but sporadic. The shiny objects, which I would say from our altitude looked circular, They would sprint to maybe 3 or 4 mountaintops, and then they would stop right still. And maybe 1 or 2 more discs would come up and meet the stop disc in the air. And then they would all start off in another direction. It was always over the Trans-Antarctic mountain range, and they never went over the Beardmore Glacier, said Brian, which is this photograph here. I asked, did any one of them ever approach your plane? Brian said, quote, no, they were always below us, always stayed below us. We were told not to talk among ourselves other than just our crew, close quote. Brian marked his map of Antarctica with X's where he and his crew had strange experiences with missing National Science Foundation scientists in Marie Byrd Land in West Antarctica, where the C-130 squadron all saw a huge 300-foot diameter hole in the ice near the South Pole, and the mountaintops where he and his flight crew kept seeing the silver discs rising up from the Trans-Antarctic mountains, but never crossing the Beardmore Glacier marked by Brian with a red X on this map. Now I want to show you another map of Antarctica with a red circle marked by a U.S. Navy SEAL who is now retired. This red circle is not far from where Brian marked on his map silver discs appearing and stopping in the 1990s before crossing the Beardmore Glacier. This red circle map is where the Navy SEAL went on a special operation in 2003 to investigate huge structures under Antarctic ice discovered by deep ground and ice-penetrating radar at the beginning of the 21st century. Now, for the first time, I want to share part 1 from my backlighted and voice-altered interview with the Navy SEAL who calls himself Spartan 1. In 2003, a U.S. Navy SEAL Special Operation Team traveled to Antarctica to investigate a perfectly geometric 8-sided octagon structure discovered by ground-penetrating radar near the Beardmore Glacier, about 93 miles from the American McMurdo Station. Another previous team of engineers and scientists had dug out the top layer of one octagon made of a pure black substance that was built on top of 2 more black octagonal structures that went down deep into the 2-mile thick ice. The following testimony is by one of those Navy SEALs who was there, but now retired. He calls himself Spartan 1 and gave me permission to videotape him on July 19th, 2018, as long as he was in shadow and his voice was altered. He reports that the octagonal entrance led to vast structures covering acres deep beneath the Antarctic ice, heated and lighted by an unknown energy source. How long ago was the large continent of Antarctica, that is as wide as the United States, when was it free of ice? Geophysicists say that Antarctica was a warm tropical climate without any ice and snow from at least 100 million years ago down to 34 million years ago. Even after Antarctica split from Africa and moved south around 80 million years ago and settled at the Earth's South Pole, the climate remained warm, even tropical. Then, by 33 million years ago, everything had changed to very cold temperatures with lots of snow and ice building up 1 to 2 miles deep all over the continent. So when were the vast black octagonal structures built, now under deep ice near the Beardmore Glacier? And who built them? Here now is Navy SEAL Spartan 1 about what he saw in 2003.
We were inbound the southeast coast of Antarctica. Our original transport was the United States aircraft carrier. From then on, we were flown by Nighthawk helicopters. When we took half tracks in, to our final contact. The very first wall structure we came to and the first door we came through, we were approximately 50 feet under the ice. The very tip or very top of this first structure, it was like an octagon inside another octagon inside another octagon.
8-sided?
Yes, ma'am. And it went deeper. Each one was deeper. The very top of the first structure that we entered, there was almost 18 feet poking from the ice. The rest of it was hidden under the ice. The first 17 to 20 feet that was sticking out were made of black basalt. To look at them in the colored photographs, they look like shiny black marble.
Do you mean that any of us, if we went into McMurdo and we got on a truck that could go on the ice, and that we would see shiny?
You would have, yes, you would have no, you would have to see it. There's no way of not seeing it.
Why aren't other people reporting this?
They're paid off not to speak, or scared, threatened.
And why would people be threatened about reporting archaeology in Antarctica?
Because I think of other things that they have found there, the technology, it's hard telling what all is there. It needs to be found out. It needs to be reported.
This force that's been active since about when?
I would say, I know at least from 2003, but I can about guarantee way before that.
How far back?
I think this structure was found, from what I was told by an individual, in the early 14th and 15th century, but they didn't know what they found. They recently went back. Recently, I say recently, it was in the late 1950s, early 1960s. This coalition that I talk about is Great Britain, United States, France, Germany, Canada, Russia. There has been a space fleet in existence for the last 25 years.
When you say space fleet, who is paying for and operating?
All of this coalition countries. The compound was in 3 stages. Each door was the same, anywhere from 18 feet thick to around 30 feet thick. Did not have standard hinges like what we see today on the door. It's not on a frame to the side. They were on pivots, one at the very top and one at the bottom. And even though these doors were that thick and that heavy, you could take one finger and push them and they would open. There was no resistance whatsoever.
What about the ceilings, hallways, floors?
The walls themselves were anywhere from 18 feet thick to 30 feet thick. And that was from both the base to the ceiling. It was lighted from the inside, but we could not find a source of light. It was a lime green in color.
A lime green?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What of this room would glow lime green in Antarctica?
The walls themselves looked like it was backlit from the base of the floor or the top of the ceiling. It would look like somebody had put a light under a cabinet to hide the light. You could see the light itself, but you could not see the light fixture. These structures, once you got inside, the outside temperature was at least 40 degrees below zero. Once you stepped inside these structures, the temperature was an ambient 68 to 72 degrees. No outside generators. The people that were there were not heating these structures. They had no means to. They were only there to take photographs, take analysis of the structure, find out what they could. There was no fixtures coming from the walls, the ceilings, or the floors. There were no lamps, no bulbs, no wires of any kind.
How much did the man who took the photos say? How big was this facility?
This one facility, there was more than one. The one that we were at stretched almost over 62 acres.
62?
Yes, ma'am. The majority of it was under the ice.
Where are you in terms of the surface of the ice when you're in those lime green glowing?
Ceilings were around 22 to 28 feet in height. The walls were lined with what I call hieroglyphics, but nothing of hieroglyphics that I've ever seen in my life. They did not look Egyptian, they were not Mayan, but they looked similar to both. The only thing that I myself could tell from one of the panels that was on the walls would look like a star map or a star chart. As far as the aliens go, there's more than one race, and we've been talking to several races since 1950s and 60s.
Do you have any details about the different types of races?
The few that I have talked to that's actually seen these races, they are human form, look and act and talk like us, except for minor differences in the eyes, the mouth, the body structure. I haven't had any more detail told to me than that.
All humanoid?
Yes, ma'am.
Blonde hair?
Most no hair at all.
Shape of the head?
Human, basic human shape. Some have larger skulls. I've been told that a few have smaller skulls, but basically the same shape as humanoid.
So what is the difference between Homo sapiens sapien and these beings?
They are far superior in strength, mental capacity. The individual that was telling me about it, strategically far superior. These were off-world from their own origins. These are the ones that we've been in contact with. And as from my understanding, they have been in contact with Homo sapiens since time began.
Are these the ones that made Homo sapiens sapien?
That's the general consensus, yes. They seeded us.
The fact that the Beardmore Glacier is in the general vicinity of both places where Brian and the C-130 crew noticed that the silver disks never crossed the glacier, and not far from where the Navy SEALs Special Ops mission went into those large black octagonal structures that were going down deep into the ice. It raises a question about geopolitical territory, and geopolitical territory that might go back millions of years. And you say that because if the last time that Antarctica was truly warm and tropical, which we know it was, goes back 34 million years ago, with structures that were covering 62 acres, as Spartan 1 describes that there were several, and that one that he was told about was 62 acres, to construct such huge, huge volumes as what he is describing, you would think that Antarctica would have had to have been free of ice. And does that mean that these structures are 33, 34 million years old? And when you start talking about geopolitical territorial conflicts and ancient, going back that far, it reminds me of December of 1999 when I was contacted by a man who worked in the World Bank. And I've mentioned this previously on another Earth Files YouTube channel a few months ago, but it's important to bring it into the context of what could Antarctica truly be on this planet in relationship to one or more alien presences, and for how long. And the World Bank representative got a hold of me and said that he had a good colleague who was retiring from the Defense Intelligence Agency after working there for 23 years, and that the DIA man wanted to meet with me because of certain content that I had in my book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. And this meeting unfolded on the East Coast after about a month to set it up. And he sort of led off by saying, Linda, my job in the Defense Intelligence Agency was to monitor and analyze the presence and conflict of 3 competing extraterrestrial biological civilizations that were affecting our planet and this solar system and throughout the Milky Way galaxy. I remember him describing his work and being stunned, because then I was not thinking in terms of the whole solar system and the Milky Way galaxy. I was then just concentrating on what was happening on Earth. But I think I am convinced by now in 2019 that the landscape of an alien presence goes far beyond Earth. And when he said that he was studying 3 competing, well, what about Antarctica? Would there be geopolitical territory there defined among competing aliens? So some had some part of the continent and others had another part of the continent? Or does it imply that maybe there is some agreement, let's say, between the United States government and something that we discovered a long time ago was in the Antarctic area? Well, then you come to whistleblowers going back, and a physicist about 3 years ago who told me that they knew from either firsthand experience or from seeing photographs that the ancient archaeology in Antarctica matches ancient archaeology that is on the backside of our moon and somehow inside of the moon, and matches the ancient archaeology that is in the Cydonia region of northern Mars. If competing extraterrestrials have geopolitical territorial conflicts, we are humans living on a planet where, since at least World War II, or all the way back to Mesopotamia 5,000, 7,000 years ago, that there have always been some kind of territorial demarcations about who was getting what from Earth, from the moon, from Mars, the solar system, and beyond. It could explain why there is so much confusion about which type. In the abduction syndrome, there are so many descriptions of so many different types. Military people, when you ask them, have you ever had firsthand knowledge about this type or this type? And some will say, no, we've only been briefed on one. And as we go deeper, in part 2, we get deeper and deeper into the consequences of those last images in which the camera was going into his drawing of the star chart, and then it dissolves into that symbol that he said was carved on the door, and was carved on several of these big, massive doors that you just touched and it pivoted in some strange way. And he said on several of those doors, there was that same circle with the 12 lines ending up jagged at the edges. And when you go back into the history of an image like that, you come to what is known as the black sun. And when we get into part 2 and other parts that will be coming and evolving, you will learn more about that particular pattern and the question that it raises. We associate the black sun with a variety of historic events and movements on our planet. What is the relationship between that black sun carved in that thick black basalt stone deep under ice in Antarctica? What is the relationship of that pattern to something that might have been 34 million years old or older? And what we historically have known as the black sun in what we'll call the modern era of Homo sapiens sapien. The mysteries get deeper and deeper, and for those of you who have read my series at Earth Files called Hall of Mirrors with a Quicksand Floor, it feels like just trying to understand what could be in Antarctica is truly a hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor, and that is what has provoked me to continue to go deeper, and I want to do more of these, we'll call them segments, that will end up being a whole hour, and eventually I will make that available in its entirety.